Hey guys, Drifter here. I have an unusual video for you today, both in its length and in its subject matter. The gameplay that we're going to be seeing is me using the AS-50 on Terminal. Had a phenomenal domination game, but it didn't really start kicking until near the end. Got an excellent kill cam. Then we're going to swap over to me and I2awInstinct playing domination on one of the new maps. I'm running assault kill streaks with an AK-47 silenced. Had an excellent game, and we just ended up barely losing it, but it was still post-worthy because I thought it was a fun game. And the subject matter today is the Devil and Raw Instinct. Yes, Raw Instinct, the guy that got accused of copying people and caused a big stink on YouTube a little while back. I didn't really want to do a video about it at the time because while I did care about it, it wasn't, to say, the most major of deals to me, and it was a huge bandwagon thing. I would not have been able to express my opinions accurately and not get hated on. As a matter of fact, I expect a lot of you to end up hating me today after hearing what I have to say. But bear in mind what we're doing here is a rhetorical exercise or a mental exercise and not an actual opinion expression. We're also going to be talking about a very old and useful friend of mine called the Devil's Advocate. The Devil's Advocate is essentially arguing for something that you don't believe in just for the sake of argument or for expanding your horizons. The origin of the term Devil's Advocate goes all the way back to the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, or perhaps even earlier than that, but what I read about was mostly in the Middle Ages. The Catholic Church had a very rigid set of people that were or were not saints. You don't just magically become a saint. They have an approval process, they sort of vote on you, they approve you, and they also have a mock trial. This also applies to people that are beatified, and if I'm not mistaken, adding extra books to the Bible to become canon, but it was mostly used on saints. And the problem was that if you had a person that you wanted to make a saint, they were almost universally loved. It was something that everybody agreed on, but in order to have some sort of approval process, some sort of oversight, some sort of double checking to make sure that no bad people got to be saints, they had a mock trial. And in the mock trial, you had a person called the Devil's Advocate. It was a priest, usually, that would speak against the person to be sainted. They actually got rid of this recently, so Mother Teresa didn't have to go through this, but saints previous to that had a person argue against them for why they were a bad person, why they were a douchebag, why they shouldn't be a saint, everything they ever did wrong in their life, and that's the Devil's Advocate. It's more commonly used today in argumentative terms to make somebody take an opinion that they don't believe in, to try to understand the other person, or perhaps broaden their horizons or something like that. And we're going to play this game today with Raw Instinct. Now, I'm going to take the position that Raw Instinct is a good guy, and that I2awInstinct is a complete douchebag. Now, that's not something that I believe in. I'm going to say this again, I don't believe that, but for the sake of argument, for this mental exercise, I'm going to act like I believe it, and I'm going to argue Raw Instinct's case here, because I don't believe he's had a Devil's Advocate, and I kind of like pissing people off, and this will be a little bit fun. Now, Raw Instinct was accused of copying people's videos. He was accused of stealing information from others, and he was accused of copying their video style and substance almost down to the T. While I can't speak too much about the video style or substance, as I'm a YouTuber that doesn't really watch a whole lot of videos, I can speak from the perspective of a weapon reviewer and the stats. Weapon stats are public. It's public data. It's part of the game. It's something that anybody can find out if they go through the trouble of decrypting the code. I am not even the original source of stats. I get them from Den Kearson's forums, from Synthic. I do my own self-testing. Now, self-testing is a little bit different because if I test something and find that it's different from the stats, I've got my own unique set of information and I don't share it. That's private information. But even though that information is private to me, it's still publicly owned, or something that you are allowed to discuss. It would be kind of like doing research in a scientific paper and then copywriting your scientific paper. You can't really do that, even though somebody tried to pass a law recently making that the norm. That's just not how it works. Weapon data is public. Weapon data, as far as Modern Warfare 3 is concerned, is generally not that complicated. There are some degrees of complication to it, and it takes a little bit to get used to the data and how to interpret it, but it's not that hard. Really, anybody could probably pick this up. Anybody that even took basic algebra at high school can do this. So Raw Instinct, as a matter of fact, I have talked to Raw Instinct. I know him, and I know T. Martin, and I know I2awInstinct, or at the time I knew I2awInstinct much more casually. Raw Instinct did actually have his own source of weapon data, so he didn't need to copy other people. If he did or didn't, which I'm not going to speak on because I'm speaking for Raw Instinct. I know for a fact he looked up weapon data because he asked me for help with it on occasion, just double checking a few things. So that data is not private. It's not something that you can copyright. I can't be the first person to review the Scorpion submachine gun and then then anybody else that reviews it after me is copying. That doesn't really work that way. You can't patent an idea of that sort. What people are mistaking is copying and copyright. I see this a lot, and I'm not trying to talk down to you. Copying people is bad. You don't want to be a copier. That's just douchey, but this information is not copyrightable. Copyrightable is a law in the United States and in most countries to some degree around the world. It enforces ownership of certain media, artistic works, songs, that sort of thing, and intellectual property. Something like the design for a car that took $100 million and thousands of engineers to nail down, when somebody could just download the gigantic PDF and get to manufacturing their own cars. That's not fair. So we have copyright protection in place to incentivize scientific and artistic works. If you don't have copyright protection, then you have problems kind of like in China, where the copyright laws are fast and loose at best, where companies don't really work too hard to invent new things. They just wait for somebody else to invent it and put in all the time, labor, and hard work, and then just rip those people off and manufacture it cheaper. The same kind of thing happens with media if you don't have copyright protection. Back in the day, Shakespeare had this problem because there were no copyright laws in Victorian England. Was it Victorian England? I can't exactly remember. It was quite some time ago. But they would have other writers and other linguists and playwrights just sit in the audience of Shakespeare's plays and copy down the entire play. Then they'd go make their own Shakespeare play, and he never got any money from it. That was just too bad, tough luck. That's how you do it. So even if he was copying people's information, it wasn't illegal. It was perhaps douchey or wrong or bad, but I don't have any proof of these things happening exactly, and it wasn't illegal. We're going to move on to a different topic now. This is one that I know about because, like I said before, I knew Raw Instinct a little bit. I'm not going to say I'm best buds with the guy. I had him on Skype. I talked to him a little bit on Twitter. I also talked to the other two people involved, iFly and T Martin. And I remember at one time T Martin was talking about how he was just going to take down Raw Instinct and just completely put him down. And it was yeah, like this YouTube hitman is going to file copyright claims and all kind of stuff like this. And to this day, Raw Instinct has been nothing but nice to me. I can say that both as the persona of the Devil's Advocate and as Drifter the person. Whatever you think about him, he was always really nice to me, and that's I don't know what you can interpret from that, but that's kind of the truth. So when I heard that from T Martin, I actually hit him up on Skype, and I'm like, you probably need to talk to T Martin. T Martin is probably going to put your ass down, and to be honest, he's got a lot of evidence. It looks bad. You need to talk to him and work out some kind of truce or change your thumbnail, or something needs to happen here. And Raw Instinct wrote back to me and said that T Martin had him blocked and just utterly and completely refused to talk to him. No negotiations, no truce, no compromise, no nothing. And I was like, are you sure about this? Because I talked to T Martin, and T Martin pretty much said the same thing. No, Raw Instinct has me blocked. He's not going to compromise. He's not going to change his thumbnails. It could possibly be two very hard-headed and opinionated people both fighting over something very valuable. Or, since I'm the Devil's Advocate, I'm going to pretend that T Martin is an asshole. T Martin is a colossal asshole that just did not want to work with Raw Instinct and decided to put him down and not negotiate with him, because when you have Skype logs, you can kind of take them out of context and make them look like whatever you wanted. So T Martin probably didn't want people to know that Raw Instinct was trying to reach out to him and negotiate some kind of truce. Again, that's not something I personally believe, but if I'm taking on the role of the Devil's Advocate, that's what I would argue, and it's an argument that may or may not be invalid because you have very little proof either way. It's not something I've ever seen. It's not something I've ever heard anybody bring up. The next thing that I would like to mention about the Skype logs is that those can be taken very, very, very badly out of context. The same with any sort of discussion or any sort of sound bite. If you take it out of context, if you chop it up too slow, if you play it over the wrong video clip, it has an entirely different meaning. The best example of which I'll use, there was a person running in the primaries for Republican presidential candidate. I'm thinking in the 2008 election. I honestly cannot remember the person's name. But his opponent took what he had to... I take that back. It was a senatorial election. Their opponent took what he had to say and put it on a giant billboard outside of town and had quotes around it. And it was a quote from the Bible, and I can't remember the exact quote at this moment, neither from the Bible or from the campaign. But the man was quoting the Bible, and he was quoting the part where the husband should be the head of the family and the woman should be subservient to her husband, blah, 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 blah. And it looked awful, and he got slammed, and he lost that campaign. And there are many of you saying, yeah, good, anybody that says that kind of stuff is a complete douchebag. And to an extent, I'd agree with that. However, it was taken very, very badly out of context. What it actually was is somebody asked him a question on his beliefs on if the man should be the head of the household or not, and he answered saying, He answered quoting the Bible, saying, you know, I'm a Christian fellow, and this is what the Bible has to say, but I personally don't believe that. I believe blah, 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 blah. But what his opponent did was take his quote of the Bible out of context and didn't show any of his other alternative beliefs and just made it look like he hated women or that women were subservient to him. And you can do this exact same thing, and this exact same thing may or may not have been done to Raw Instinct. I know he showed a lot of little Skype logs and Skype chats, but I've had people show me Skype chats of other things trying to prove a variety of people were cheating them or stealing them. As some of them, the proof is very, very solid. Some of it's much more subjective. You see the Skype logs are short, the conversations are lacking context, lacking meaning. I can't scroll through the entire 5 pages at once. I just get these little snippets. And I2awInstinct, I'm just going to call him I2awInstinct. I hope I2awInstinct or I2awInstinct. It's fucking I2awInstinct. I called him I2awInstinct all night. He's in the game with me right here. You'll see him pop up every now and then. He very well could have done that. It probably wouldn't have been that hard. I could take the Skype chats of somebody that I know pretty well and get along good with, like I'll use Hastro as an example from Team Envious, and if I wanted to gerrymander and cherry pick different things from his Skype chat, I could probably make him look like a huge asshole and make a video about him and just make it look like he's the worst person in the world. And you know, if I'm the devil's advocate, I would say that I2awInstinct probably did this. Personally, again, I don't believe that, but it's an argument that you can make. And it's not an unreasonable argument because smaller channels do crazy shit. Now, this guy has a big channel now. It's like 80,000 subscribers. Not that long ago, it was at 1,500, which is in the small to medium range. And as a person who now, quote, has a big channel, it doesn't really feel any different than it did before. Other people do crazy shit to get your attention. And that may have been what's happening with Raw Instinct. I've had people pitch me an idea, and then 3 months later, I make a video similar to the idea. Honestly, it might have stuck in my brain from back then, and then get furious. You stole my idea. You didn't give me any credit. What's your problem? You're ripping me off. I'm going to sue you. You violated copyright, blah, 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 blah. It may have been the same thing with I2awInstinct. For all I know, he was helping out Raw Instinct, giving him ideas, and Raw Instinct used the ideas. And, you know, maybe I2awInstinct was constantly asking for shoutouts. Can you do this? Can you like the video? Can you favorite the video? That's something I get tons of. Every single time I open my inbox, there are like 50 people wanting a shoutout, wanting me to upload their gameplay. I want a dual comm. I want you to make a video about me because I'm so awesome. Do this, do that. And the number one word that I had to learn to say was no, 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 I can't do this. If I even answered those messages, much less tried to grant the request, I would spend all day doing it. It would be like a super full-time job, and I2awInstinct could have just been a little bitch like that, just constantly asking for shit that he didn't deserve. And Raw Instinct probably told him off. No, I don't like videos. No, I'm not going to like your video. No, I don't give a damn about your videos. You know, nobody really likes videos. That's why we don't like videos. And that's the argument that I would make. That's all for the objective devil's advocate, but we have one more part of this game to play. This is a much more personal part of the devil's advocate, but it is designed to hit home in a much more effective way. Let's pretend that you are Raw Instinct, and we're going to go from both sides, Raw Instinct guilty and Raw Instinct innocent. Let's say that you're Raw Instinct innocent, and that everything I just said as the devil's advocate is true. T. Martin was a complete asshole to you. You got your own stats. You inadvertently copied him. You chose a show and gun review ideas and things that were fairly common and that anybody that used Google AdSense probably would have figured out would have got you a lot of views, but you were accused of copying. And this I2awInstinct guy was always on Skype bothering you all the time about these video ideas and getting shoutouts and favorites among the hundreds of thousands of other people asking you for favors and favorites. And you did absolutely nothing wrong, and your channel got shut down. You lost your partnership, everybody shat on you, everybody just decided that you're the worst person ever, and you become one big YouTube meme. How would that make you feel? Well, that's one of the things that you have to consider before moving into action. The I2awInstinct video was something of a call to action, and when you have a call to action, it's usually against somebody or something or some movement, and in this case, it was against a person. And before you go and move against a person, you have to put yourself in their shoes from the perspective perspective of them being innocent. Like, how would you feel if you were innocent and somebody, you know, misconstrued some Skype chats and just made you look awful and ruined your entire YouTube career? That would be a terrible, terrible thing. So before you move against somebody, you need to kind of consider that possibility. But it's more interesting to play this game from the side of Raw Instinct, the guilty person. So let's say you are Raw Instinct and you do a couple of review shows on your own, but let's say you're not very good with the data or it takes too long, and that you see that there's this other guy named T. Martin who has a show that's beautifully optimized for Google AdSense for searches, that has a very large following, a very energized base, and you think he's doing very, very well. And you realize something, YouTube is something of a lawless place right now. There are lots of provisions in place for copyright protection and to prevent people from making crazy racist or moderately inflammatory videos. But as far as things like copying somebody else's videos and honestly even getting around the copyright protections and making money, it is a wild, wild west. YouTube and web entertainment is ultimately the wild west of entertainment right now. Whether they admit it or not, commentators like myself and other people are blazing the frontiers for the future of free entertainment. And what if you were in that position? Most of you are aware that YouTube makes a lot of money. I make money on these YouTube videos. Those little ads that pop up, those little movie trailers. Somebody out there thinks it's worth the time to pay me like half a cent or a tenth of a cent or something like that for each one of you guys that watches one of those. And when something, which I'm just guesstimating right now, this video will probably get like 15, 20,000 views. When that many people watch it, that little tenth of a cent has a tendency to really stack up, and it's a scaling problem. Raw Instinct saw the potential for this, and he knew that there weren't really a lot of rules or regulations going on. What would you do if you were in his position? Now, don't bullshit me. Every last one of you is going to say, I would make my own content. I would make the best stuff that I could possibly make. I would never copy somebody. But you get your first check for, you know, let's say a lot of money, because that's part of my machinima contract is I'm not allowed to name numbers. But we're going to use the number a lot of money, a big chunk of money, more money than you've probably ever seen in your life, because, you know, most commentators are high school, college, generally very, very broke people. What would you do if that first check was huge and you got it for copying? And you're like, maybe if I copied more, it would be better. And then, you know, the T. Martin starts fighting back, and he's like, you know, I don't really want to copy this T. Martin guy because he's too tough to deal with. I'll move on. I'll pick on smaller channels. I'll copy people that you've never heard of before, people that can't really fight back, people that don't have a voice, people that essentially don't matter. And again, a lot of you are saying, oh, I would never do that. I would never do that. And I'm going to go ahead and be the first guy to tell you that's total bullshit. There are a lot of you that would do that. Think about every time you've cheated on your schoolwork, every time you've cheated at your job, every time you've stolen money, told a small white lie. It's a very, very similar thing. It's even easier here because it's an impersonal thing. You don't have to see the person that you're taking from. You don't have to see the person that you're copying. You don't have to see the person that you're hurting. It's just not there. That there's a huge disconnect. I don't know how the hell that guy killed me. That was just really, really weird right there. That just really flubbed me up because I thought I shot him a huge times. I can tell you just from playing video games that a lot of you would do this. Like DayZ, when everybody sees DayZ, they think, you know, I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to go and I'm going to help people and I'm going to cooperate. And about after you die one or two times, every single person swaps to shoot on sight. And I can guarantee you this because like 95% of the people I see shoot on sight. So what would you do? Given the opportunity, you could be a douchebag and copy somebody else's content and be a dick to people and make more money than you've ever seen in your life. Would you do it? Again, many of you are going to say no. The reality is that after you get a few paychecks, many of you would say yes. This is kind of a slippery slope of judgment because many of us have the same faults. We have the same gripes, and you have to hold somebody to a higher standard. If I judge people by, you know, my standards, like how I act, my God, we would all be free. Everybody would be totally okay. Or by whose standard are you judging? Some people think it's okay to lie in some situations. Some people think it's okay to lie in no situations. Some people think the rules just don't apply to them. This applies for joining open lobbies. Like I have open lobbies all the time, and one of the few rules I have is if I don't invite you, please don't join, because it's not fun when you watch the stream and come hunt me down and something like that. And there are a few trolls, but like 80% of the people that join, I ask them, why did you join? And they're like, well, I wanted to. And I'm like, but it's against the rules. I said you couldn't. He's like, yeah, but I didn't think that applied to me. And this is the same thing. You don't want to hold somebody to your standards. You don't want to judge them personally. So while it's interesting to look at it from a different perspective, the standards of judgment need to be higher than oneself, beyond oneself, more than human in a way. And I'm not appealing to the divine here, more like talking codified, standard, do X, receive Y kind of punishment. And that's why you don't want to judge somebody from a personal point of view. I hope that you learned something from all this devil's advocate stuff. The one thing that I hope that you haven't learned that you thought you learned is that I love Raw Instinct and T. Martin and iFly are assholes, because I get along great with those guys, and that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is it's very, very important to understand multiple perspectives, and using the devil's advocate, you can understand multiple perspectives very easily just by looking at things objectively from a negative point of view, and then more subjectively from a first-person point of view by putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And this is very useful for understanding people that are different from you. In order to help emphasize the value of using the devil's advocate in your everyday life, I've got 3 other examples for you that are non-YouTube related and should really hit home. The first example is going to be far more inflammatory than the other 2, so there's probably going to be a lot of bad comments about this one, but I'm going to play the devil's advocate for Osama bin Laden. A lot of you, or I hope that very few of you are of this opinion, but I know some people that think Osama bin Laden is just, or was, he's dead now, just a big mean boogeyman that sits over there in Afghanistan or Pakistan in his cave, and he hates Americans because his beard is itchy and his country is poor and his women aren't as loose as ours, and he just hates our God. Well, he probably does hate the American version of God, but that's a little bit of a different thing. And, you know, they just attacked our country because they hated us, and that's the extent of the understanding of Osama bin Laden. They think that, you know, they bombed America, that's it, they're enemies, they're bad, they hate us, just that they hate us. That's all that they need to know before they go on attack mode. And I agree that Osama bin Laden should have been attacked. I believe that the Taliban should have been retaliated against and all of that, but by playing devil's advocate, you can understand your enemy better. If you wanted to assassinate Osama bin Laden earlier, if you wanted to catch him, you're not going to be able to catch a person or predict their behavior just on who you think they are, like, oh, he's just an asshole, so I'm going to act like an asshole. No, you really need to step into his shoes and understand where he's coming from. This is the Osama bin Laden that attacked the United States, or claimed that he did, because he didn't like U.S. militarism in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia or abroad. He saw the United States as this big sort of Christian empire in a way, and he wanted to take us down because he kind of saw an impending culture war, because even though we weren't necessarily taking over other countries through our bombs and our tanks and our bases, he did really hate those military bases in Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken, but there was and still is a culture war going on between the West and the East, and to a lesser degree versus Africa and some of the more tribal nations. And when our industrialized culture economy rolls in and our products, we bring our culture with it. We're exporting our culture, our media, the way our products are designed, the way we think people should think, and the way we think that people should dress, and it clashes with local culture, and some people fight back against this very, very aggressively. And I believe this is one of the reasons that Osama bin Laden wanted to attack us. He wanted to attack our World Trade Centers and sink our economy to slow down the culture war, among many, many, many other things. I could talk about Osama bin Laden all day, but the point is, if you want to defeat your enemy like a chess player, you don't want to just see them as an external thing, even though they are an external threat. You want to get into their shoes so that you can move the pieces against them, so that you can pretend to be them and expect where they're going to move their pieces and counter-maneuver them. One that is almost exclusively limited to the United States is the Democrat versus Republican. You can use this either way. If you're in a different country, you can just say left versus right, conservative versus liberal. They more or less line up the same. And you see things like free trade or fair trade, because free trade and fair trade are completely different concepts. Fair trade is usually like countries that have poor labor regulations, that treat their laborers bad. You give them taxes, you give them tariffs, import, export, and you kind of work to tax and tariff to balance the scales, maybe on human rights, maybe that one country is just way bigger than another, and Singapore can't compete with China on grain production just because of the volume of land that's there. So you have lots and lots of different things to help balance the trade and make it fair so that one country doesn't dominate the other. And then you have free trade, which would be a more typical conservative Republican kind of thing, where you get rid of all those limitations and everybody trades to their maximum potential, because economically that's where you get your best benefit. But usually in the very, very long run, people get screwed in that manner. The small countries get smaller, the big countries get bigger, and that's a very typical left-right issue. And we're not going to talk about which one is right today, but you have to be able to put yourself in the perspective of the other person, try and understand why they think it's right. Another Democrat versus Republican would be Republicans are traditionally very traditional values, family values, the same values, my father's values, my grandfather's values. These values have worked and worked and worked. Why do we need to change them? A Democratic or liberal person would be more of an experimental value type person. That's why they would support gay marriage, or the Democrats, not historically, but now they are more the party of any sort of ethnicity that's not white. They're the non-white party. They're the interracial marriage party. They're the black party. They're the Hispanic party. Asians are kind of a mixed bag. But they're the party of alternative values, and one thing that Republicans typically don't see is that their traditional values that they hold today were once considered alternative or experimental or liberal, not that long ago even, and that through trial and error we determined the ones that were good. And the thing that Democrats or liberals don't often see is that their new ideas, their new values, their experimental systems are just that. They're typically very overconfident of the things that they believe are correct morally or socially or even fiscally, and they haven't given it a trial run, and they just think that this is best and that we should do this, and to hell with that old stuff, and they don't really understand the not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. And the conservatives don't understand the value of experimentation. The last one that I'm going to use is atheist versus Christian. This was one that hits home again, especially in my country where there's a culture war going on between atheists and Christian. In a lot of countries, you see this going on in a lot of different places. And these are two groups of people that typically do not understand each other very, very well, especially if you have somebody that was brought up their whole life as an atheist versus somebody that was brought up their whole life as a Christian. You have very, very different indoctrinations there. And I say indoctrinations plural because you get indoctrinated as an atheist to a lesser extent than you do as a Christian, but you do get indoctrinated in a way. And the fundamental disagreement that we typically have here is an atheist person is not able to wrap their mind around the fact that a Christian thinks in more spiritual terms, that they believe in some form of magic or a higher being or angels, or that there is a orchestrated purpose behind the world, and that's how they see their world. That's their fundamental worldview, is through a sort of spiritual lens. And a Christian person looking at an atheist typically is unable to understand how a person sees a world without these things. They don't understand the objective world, and I'm not saying that meaning that they don't understand science, that's a different thing, but they don't understand the world in the same way that an atheist would, in that the world just is and it does its own thing, and you don't need these spirits and gods and goddesses going on. They also, within both groups actually, have very different understandings of what the definition of God or a God is. Typically atheists are going to take the position that there's just no God, and that's tough shit. And their problem is they make the false assumption that every single Christian thinks that God is just some big guy that sits in the heaven with a beard and throws lightning bolts at people and kind of plays dice with people's lives. The reality that any sort of Christian or theist in general, that they all hold this belief to be universal, is not true. There are many varying beliefs and types of and definitions of God and goddesses, and how you would see the afterlife. And an atheist person doesn't understand this. They just look at these people and think they must be so dumb to believe in this hokey-pokey magic beard man in the sky. You know, you pray and the plane's not going to crash. That's ridiculous. And even amongst each or theists, they argue with each other about what God can and can't do, or what it won't do, or your definition of a God. And the problem with I'm going to go the left and the right, and the atheist and the Christian, is that they rarely step back and put themselves in the other person's shoes and try really hard to understand what the other person is saying. Come at it from a person like, I'm going to say, if you're a Christian right now, try and imagine the world with nothing spiritual. There is no God, there is no spirituality, there is nothing going on, and try and imagine that world. Just think about how it goes, think about how your beliefs would change, how you would feel about things, what are the implications on morality. And if you sit there and think about it 10, 15, probably longer than this video is going to continue, you'll start to see a different world. And as a person who is an atheist, if you sit back and start thinking about a world of spirits and spiritual connections and deep emotional meanings behind these things, with an afterlife and with other beings of, you know, unimaginable powers that you can't hope to comprehend, you'll start to see the world through the lens of a person with some sort of theistic belief. And hopefully, if any of you go through any of this, you will understand the other person better. That doesn't mean you agree with them at all. Usually it's going to boil down to a cromulent point or a fundamental difference in belief that kind of defines the rest of how things go. The example there would be on abortion. The cromulent point, we can skip right through it, is a fetus life. Is it? The people that are pro-abortion usually say that a fetus is not alive until it's born. The people that are anti-abortion are a life is a life. And then you have a second cromulent point of what is the value of a life? Is a life worth living if it's going to be miserable? And some people say, yes, life is more valuable than anything above misery, above economics and probabilities. And there are some people that say, you know, if it's going to have a terrible, terrible life, it shouldn't even live to begin with. It'd just be better to let it go. And you have two cromulent points. And when you get to that core fundamental understanding of the other side or of a different person in an issue, you have enlightened yourself. You've become a better person and you understand something better. That went on for a long time. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the commentary. Sorry it went on so long. And I hope that you use the devil's advocate in the future to make yourself a better person. Drifter out.